Hello, if you're here for building a business case for adopting a component content management system for technical documentation, you are in the right place. My name is Scott Abel, and I'll be the host of today's show. A few things you'll need to know today. We don't have access to your camera or your microphone, which means we can't see or hear you during today's broadcast. We are recording this show as we do with all of the Content Wrangler webinars. You can access an on-demand recording about 30 minutes after the live show ends, simply by using the same URL that you're using to watch today's live show. Paste it in your browser and pop on over. You'll be able to access the on-demand recording. If you also like to, you can share that link with others that you think might find the topic of today's show of interest. We also want you to be able to ask questions at any time during today's show. Doing so is easy. Scroll down beneath your webinar viewing panel to the Ask a Question area. Fill out the little form and send it in to me. I will queue up as many as possible and attempt to get answers based on the amount of time that we have available at the end of the presentation. All right, there's also some additional content. Actually, there's not. Due to a technical glitch, you don't have to worry about that. So we'll skip right over that and you don't have to worry. I just say at the end of the show, I'd like you to rate the quality of the information that you received today using our 1 through 5 star rating system, in which 1 is a low rating and 5 is an exceptional one. There's also a little field into which you can type some feedback that we share with our presenters and use to make the shows better in the future. A few commercials here, so that one's irrelevant, but we'll go ahead on to the upcoming event. LavaCon takes place in Atlanta, Georgia this year, October the 5th through the 8th. It is the conference for content strategy and technical communication management. This annual event attracts about 400 of your peers, technical writers, information architects, and others interested in content creation, management, and delivery. We have great multi-track sessions there where you can learn about case studies, best practices, lessons learned. There's an exhibition hall for software and services vendors and a great networking opportunities. It's a fun conference. There are even some pre and post-conference workshops for hands-on activities where you can actually learn to do something. It's highly recommended, and you can save 10% off the cost of registration when you use discount code TCW at checkout. Also like to thank the sponsors of the Content Wrangler webinar channel. Hereto is the AI-enabled component content management system platform that's in use around the globe to deploy documentation and developer portals that delight customers. Let's hear from one of their customers right now.
When we were looking for a CCMS, we were trying to find the right one, and we were coming from an unstructured wiki environment. At the time, it seemed like that was everything that we needed. But after we saw what Hereto could do, we were very excited. After moving into Hereto, I could very quickly see the benefits. Content was actually organized in an understandable way. I was able to find what I needed when I needed it. With structured authoring, it's almost like a template. So it's really easy to see what information is needed in what area. So anybody could jump in and enter the content that they need in the right place, and the writer can come in later and polish it up, get it ready for publishing. It was a big transition, but in the end, it was totally worth it.
Right, I'm Scott Abel. Welcome to the show. And with me, I have Melanie Davis. Melanie, how are you today?
Doing well, Scott. So hope you are too.
I am. Awesome. And hey, you're coming in loud and clear. So our little test earlier is working. Apparently, we are now on the internet, and that gives us one step closer to having a good show today. I know you're excited to talk about things today, and I've already done the housekeeping announcements. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen so you can start to begin your presentation. And while you're doing that, I'll let the audience members know who just joined us that during this show at any time you can, and we encourage you to do so, ask questions. Doing so is easy. Just scroll down beneath your webinar viewing panel to the Ask a Question tab. You can send a question in to me. I will queue up as many as possible and try to get answers for you in the Q&A portion of today's show. All right, Melanie, I am going to put myself on mute, and you can take it away.
Thanks so much, Scott. All right. Well, today we are taking a deeper dive into the chat we had in June on building a business case for DITA and a CCMS for technical documentation. So today we're looking at lessons learned on adopting a DITA and a CCMS for documentation. Well, let's start at the beginning. Let's start by confirming what we mean by some of the terms that we're going to be using. So first of all, let's think about what structured versus unstructured content means. Structured content, it doesn't simply mean that you use headings to provide a clear structural signpost in your document. We hope you're doing that anyway. It really talks about the characteristics of how that document can be created, disseminated, and searched. And so An unstructured document, you tend to have maybe a monolithic document that's presented as a single unit, like, a large Word document. Reuse is really limited to just cutting and pasting particular bits of text. You've got locally applied text decorations, so you're swiping things and making them bold, and you're making them underlined, whatever. But it's difficult for people or machines to search, to analyze, to catalog. On the other hand, structured content is modular pieces of information that can be assembled like components. They can be organized in a consistent and predictable framework. They're classified with metadata, which is simply machine-readable description. They're written in a standardized language format like XML or DITA. They're easily searchable, and very importantly, your content is reusable. Well, what do we mean by standards or specs? Well, I think XML is one that most people recognize. It's a markup language, and really it just stores the format of your file and makes it transmittable between devices. So it just defines a set of rules for encoding your documents in a way that both humans and machines can read. DITA, that's Darwin Information Typing Architecture, that just a set of predefined tags for creating structured documentation. You may have heard of DocBook. That's a general purpose XML, HTML type that's well suited for books, not limited to, but that was its original intent. And so it has a schema that defines the main structural components of books. Component content management system manages your content at a component rather than at the full document level. And so within that, each component represents a single topic, a concept, or an asset. So images are components, tables, products, descriptions, topics, procedures. You can adjust the size of a particular component for the level of reuse you're expecting. So you write, store, and publish from a CCMS to your preferred delivery channel. And so semantically rich content. That's content that knows who it is, why it's there, and what it plans to do for you. It is able to communicate its meaning both to people and to search engines or AI models. It's not just machine language. It's not just tagged content. It uses natural language. It may have related terms, but most importantly, it provides context. And by providing that context, it can improve your site rank in a traditional search or your visibility in AI results. So your content gets cited as the authority. And so we're going to look at how do we leverage the power of semantically rich, structured content by managing it in a component content management system. All right. Well, like any organizational thing, we're going to work in a couple of phases. So let's make a plan, Stan. Here's how we're going to prepare a DITA CCMS implementation. We're going to take stock of what we have. We are going to create a design plan. We are going to create a phased strategy. We're going to plan for some perils and some pitfalls. And of course, we're going to build a compelling business case. So, taking stock. If you are in the position that Hereto customer was, where you are in, say, a wiki or in a Word document where you have a lot of content, it is not technically structured content in the way we just defined, you are going to have to make a plan to first understand what you have so that you can decide what you're going to do. So you're going to want a detailed plan, and you can make it as simple or as detailed as you want to make sure you know what you have so that you can specify where it's going to go. Things you might consider listing in your plan, its existing location. So what folder is it in? Is there some kind of a map that shows how that content goes together into a larger publication? You want your topic titles, your file names, any media that you might include. So basically what you want to do is have a good list of what you already have. Then, setting our list aside just briefly, we're going to create a design plan. This is the calling card that you're going to share with your business leaders, your stakeholders, about why we need to adopt structured authoring and a CCMS. And so here in your design plan, you're going to cover what the current pain points are and what are your technical shortcomings. It's a good idea to identify some competitor sites that you really admire, as well as some that you really dislike, so that you can show what your plans are. You want to sketch your output. If you have the wherewithal to actually create a mock-up, so much the better. It's much easier for folks outside of our industry to see what we mean than necessarily just to read. And then you're going to review that plan with your stakeholders, with your customers, with your colleagues. And because you've created a comprehensive plan, you have things that you know will be dropped. And so that's when you're going to prioritize what it is that you feel is essential and what would be nice to have when you get the project going. And so we're going to go with our regular milestone phases for a lot of the planning. So we've planned, then we're going to execute, we're going to finalize, and we're going to assess. And so that is what your strategy, your plan is going to spell out. So as I said, you're going to decide what's table stakes, what do you absolutely have to have, and what is nice to have. And so you're going to set your plan up in these types of phases. The first is, how do you get your content from the repository it's in now into the CCMS? And next, we're going to look at moving the actual platform. So that includes, how do you publish that content? You may have a CCMS that has an integrated portal, or you may have a headless CCMS, which means you use APIs to pipe the content from your CCMS into another publishing tool so that it is available typically on the web. Then you might think about, okay, we've got everything in the system, but we know we have a lot of legacy content and we want to move that content into properly structured DITA XML docbook. So we'll look at that as a separate phase. The first two are mechanics. Those are the ones that you absolutely have to go live, and the others are things that you're doing to improve your offering. So we're going to standardize your content. There'll be some polishing touches, and then you actually need to plan the way you're going to take advantage of your new system and how you're going to maintain that. So we're going to look at each of the stages. When we're looking at our plan at perils and pitfalls, you need to have a pretty good idea of what your technical risks are. What happens if your go live doesn't go? You need to be able to turn your existing system back on. What happens if you don't get some of the functionality that was anticipated? What happens if you don't have the resources that you were promised to deliver this in the time that you had? So those are all the things that you want to think about. Another really important one is that you're going to have to plan some downtime for your system. And typically that means not just we're going to take our site down today while we turn the other one on. It may be we're not going to publish for a week or two while we finish our cutover. So that needs to be planned. And then, as I said, once you understand your risks, then you need to have your fallback plan, what to do in case things don't go as expected. Okay, still in planning, we need to build that compelling business case. And that was the subject of the chat that we had in June. And so I'll summarize some of the key points there and you to go back and watch that in much more detail to dive a little deeper. So the first is you have to communicate the value of this migration. You need to define the return on investment to enable stakeholders to make the case for what your technical content contributes to the business in terms of finance, marketing, branding, compliance, customer loyalty. And that means you're going to have to use metrics to prove how you are going to increase or decrease aspects to improve customer outcomes. So we're going to increase our customer satisfaction scores. We're going to decrease the volume of support tickets. So we're going to have more accessible documentation site. We're going to have an easier way for us to maintain that. That's important to us. That's not what's going to get your check signed from your stakeholders. Talk to them in the terms that make sense to them in a business context. Similarly, you want to illustrate the cross-functional benefits to the organization. So beyond its value to us in the documentation team, how is it going to help our colleagues in other teams? And I find a really good way to do that is to draw parallels to their work practices and tools. So for instance, if your software development team works in Agile, they understand reusable components and modules, they have QA, they compile, they release. So we can talk about the way this system will help us develop our content iteratively and be able to have more predictable, reliable publishing to go with the software releases. If you're in hardware, your engineers sure understand measure twice and cut once. So we are going to make sure that everything is lined up for success and that we will be able to move things out in more of an assembly line than highly customized individual devices. Sales and marketing, talk to them about brand books, customer campaigns, mail shots. And those are the types of things. Their brand books are like our style guides. Their customer campaigns can equate to our release publishing pipelines, etc. Customer success, they're your front line with customers. They are frequently tap dancing in front of the firing squad. So you want to tell them how this is going to benefit them. They'll have something that they can share in their quarterly business reports. It will provide upselling opportunities. It will give a way to take customer satisfaction scores. And finance, they work in terms of quarterly results, profit and loss statements. And so you're looking to draw parallels between the type of tools that they use for those that are beyond just standard productivity tools. I guarantee you these teams aren't just simply using productivity tools like Office or Google Teams. They are using specialist tools for the jobs they're trying to do. And that's what our ask is. We need the tools to do our jobs well. Another important selling point is get customer input. What do they already think of what your documentation delivers? You can survey them. You may have a feedback mechanism in your doc portal. Certainly your customer success manager will be able to provide feedback, and your support tickets will give a clear indication of what your customers love, what they hate, where they feel let down. And then you'll take that information to turn that into metrics so that you can demonstrate how the right tool set can help scale productivity. And then finally, show and tell, right? Appeal to their fear of missing out. Give them a prototype, give them a mock-up, show them the competitor sites so that it's not just we want another. They can really, you're building up their desire to have the thing that's going to the business. All right, that was a lot of planning, but that's really the most important, right? You can kind of leave it to, well, we'll wing it and pick up the pieces, or work on your plan in far more detail so you're ready to execute. Okay, how are we going to execute on our implementation? Well, we're going to map those strategic plan phases to timed tactical tasks. You're going to get the resources that you need. You're going to check and communicate progress. You are going to claim your victory, and then you are going to move to maintenance mode. Okay, so we're looking at our high-level phases, and in the first phase of planning, and you do want to include planning as a phase, this is where you are going to confirm your requirements and set the scope of the project. You're going to assemble the team and the tools that you need. We're looking at how we're mitigating those risks we identified, and something that we probably don't do enough, but I highly recommend, is that we have a communication strategy for our project. Treat it just the way you would a new product release or a major update, and make sure that everybody is aware that it's coming, what they may need to do as part of it, and then be able to say that regularly throughout your migration. All right, so that was our plan. All right, so as our second strategic phase, we're going to look at content. We're going to spell out the migration tasks for the content that you are moving to a CCMS. So we're going to identify any information architectural changes that we might want to make. This is where you're going to have an inventory of your content so that you can identify which content are you going to move, what content do you plan to add, and what content do you plan to delete. Most of us have a huge volume of legacy content, and this might be a good time to some of the debris. Content that is no longer active, doesn't need to be moved to the new site if you don't have a future need to publish it again. This is not necessarily the time that you are going to do anything to that content. At this point, we're just making sure we move it from the old repository into the new. That might require you to create some migration tools to reformat your content. So for instance, if your source content is in Microsoft Word or in a wiki, you need to get it at least into XML or perhaps DITA or DocBook to work in the CMS that you are using. That is something that you have developers that can help you with if you're in software, that your CCMS vendor might be able to provide you, or indeed you can find independent contractors that will help you to get your current content into the format it needs to be in order to fit into your CCMS. And then, of course, we're going to move that content. We're going to validate that we got the content that we intended to get into place. And once it's in there, then we can start shuffling it around if we have some information architecture changes that we wanted to make. And then if we want to apply taxonomy and metadata, that the content in the CCMS, and that will help when you're going to deploy it to a portal. And then again, we talked earlier about the metadata that says this is the type of content that I'm in, and that is useful for your CCMS, for engines, for AI agents. And then if you have translation requirements, then you want to make sure that as part of moving your content, you've accounted for any translation and localization that you need. Right. We're going to move on to our next phase where we're going to migrate our platform. And by that, we're talking about the publishing platform that you'll use with your new CCMS. And again, it may be integrated with your CCMS, or it may be something that you plug your CCMS into. But this is what it's going to look like to the user. And remembering that in structured content, we separate form from function. So we're worried about the function of our content within the CCMS. In our structured content, we're interested in the form. How is it presented once we go to publish it into a publishing platform? So here's where you look at what your existing documentation framework is. What are you, based on your research, going to keep, and what will you get rid of? And then here's your opportunity to look at new features and functionality in your new CCMS that will improve your experience. You're going to look at that design and start working with your vendor to translate your diagram, your mock-up, your layout into the code that will be the framework underlying the doc portal. This is also the time, as you're planning this, that you have to schedule the time that your platform's going to be down. And that's rarely a decision you get to make on your own. And so that will working with your stakeholders to agree when the platform, your help portal, can be down and for how long. Okay. What about how is your user going to get access? If we don't think of this now, we're going to have a shiny new car that nobody has the keys to get in. So if you have an SSO, you are going to have requirements for user access and authentication. If you don't, you are going to have to think about whether all of your content is going to be public so that anybody can get to any of it. And if you don't intend it all to be public and you don't yet have an SSO, that's a planning activity for making sure that you have put up the appropriate entryways for your users to get into your site. And you may decide that you would like to have an internal site, an external site. Those are mechanics that need to be planned for. And that will involve work with your IT security department, and your deployment teams, as well as the vendor. All right, other things that we're going to do when we're migrating our CCMS for the publishing platform is you've got to think about your navigation. So this is building on our information architecture. How are we going to get people from here to there? Do we have an opportunity to personalize their navigation? Is it going to be intuitive? How much will you have on the home page? Will you have landing pages? Will you display the entire table of contents, or will you just keep sectional tables of contents to reduce, a very large number of topics in a site site contents panel? What kind of identification features will you use? So here we're looking at how will you design your taxonomy and your facets to allow people to filter for the information that they use? How will they find the types of content that are relevant to them, either by the role they have, the job they do, the product they have, et cetera, et cetera. So how are you going to help them to identify the content that they're after? And user engagement features. What kind of search will you have? Will you have federated search that will allow your user to search within this content channel and also find results from your community, from your support knowledge base, from your corporate .com site? What about bookmarks and favorites? How will you allow people to engage with your content? Will you have features to allow people to provide feedback directly from your site? And will that be feedback on the content, feedback on the mechanics, or both? You're wanting to think ahead about your user's experience, the experience for your team in maintaining this, and for your colleagues that you will be involved in contributing to and maintaining your new site. All right, and then we will put all of those mechanics in place. Our framework is ready. We do that on a dev server so that we are not interfering with continuing releases on prod. If your CCMS is a headless one, you may want to ensure that you obtain a temp environment so that you can see what you're doing with your new platform without interrupting your live platform on prod. When it is all ready, when you have executed and tested and confirmed, then you cut over to prod. That means the new site is live. The other site is now going to be taken down. It would be very rare to have two sites live because you're really going to want to either maintain or replace your site URL. So this is the moment of truth when you cut over to prod, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you make sure that you're ready. All right, so that was, a phased approach. Those are your first two minimum phases to go live. And then if you have enough time to do extra phases before you go live, put them in there. If not, schedule them to follow that go live site. If you don't schedule them, you know exactly where they're going, right? That's right, to our backlog, to sit there with other technical debt. All right, let's talk now about the team and the tools we need when we're executing. So we have a bunch of stakeholders, and we have the folks that are actually going to be involved in doing the work. Your stakeholders are important. I cannot urge you strongly enough to get a corporate sponsor. Get a corporate sponsor as high up the food chain as you can. It should be at least your manager or their manager, but somebody who has a vested interest in the success of the documentation. You should involve any other departments who use the documentation, who interact with your users, or who contribute to or depend on the documentation availability. Any of those folks need to be involved. And you need to get their input. The earlier, the better. As we know, people have a strong, if frequently uninformed, opinion on our work. They have very firm opinions about the way your page should look, about how you should manage navigation, etc., etc. And you want to leave yourself enough time to resolve those preferences during the planning. So not to give in, but to get yourself the information that you need to prove the route that you are proposing, or to adopt some of those if they truly make good sense. In terms of contributors, it's not just the documentation team. It's everybody that's involved in getting our content developed and tested and deployed. For people outside of your department, for people over whose schedule you do not have control, get their project work scheduled on their calendars. We know that very frequently reviews tend to be requests for other people to do us a favor and please look at this. We absolutely cannot afford reviews in this type of project. So once we've worked out who needs to do what, you have got to get their work on their project schedules, and it has to be tied to their success measurements, that they are an integral part of the project and that they are key to its success. You also want to be sure that you are talking to any other digital content channels in your organization. So anybody that has links coming into your documentation or from the documentation to their channel, you need to make sure you're talking with them nice and early so that you can update those incoming and outgoing links and make any redirects that are necessary. Logistics in terms of the team, Typically, we have a reasonably small number of writers, but even if you have quite a large team, you can't move everybody from your existing publishing releases onto the migration. And so you'll have to work out how best to organize the effort over this period so that you keep some of your writers working on live releases and using the existing publishing system, and then assign some to focus on the migration. This is where your plan is also going to be important, because you will continue to develop content in the existing system while you are preparing the new one, and you don't want that to get left behind. So that's on your spreadsheet of what content we said we were going to move, but remember we said add. So that's content that you may be adding as you go. Okay, and then we talked again on the tools front. Obviously, you've got to have your current source and version control system, your new environment. And again, you want to make sure that you have a development environment, but a separate temp environment to view your publishing output so that you are not interfering with your active production server. You're going to want some kind of planning and tracking tools. And we're going to talk more about communications channel, because remember, we're going to let people know what's going on. Okay, so we've assembled our team. How are we going to track and communicate our progress? Well, if there is any way for you to beg, borrow, or steal a project manager, take the opportunity. If you can't have one full time, make sure that you are engaged with someone who manages the software delivery or the release cycle. Somebody that is available to provide input on their planning process and to make sure that we are included in their schedule. So we want to make sure, particularly with software, that we are working within development schedules. Project planning. This is not the back of the napkin planning, right? So if there is an application that you can use, if there are spreadsheets, if there are Kanban boards, use the thing that works best for you. It's for your benefit and it's for your stakeholders' benefit. So where possible, use what other teams are using, but don't take a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Find the applications that are going to work well for what you are trying to accomplish. Gives insight. If you have a ticket tracking application, as I said, a Kanban board, to spell out who's doing what and when so that you can track your progress. That should be part of your regular status meetings for the team that is working on the migration to report on their progress against the plan. All right. As part of our communication progress, we are going to not just communicate, we are going to over-communicate. This is a campaign. We are going to besiege our internal communications channels. So if you have status meetings, management reports, Slack or Teams, if you are still on an on-site place and you have a place where you put physical posters, you want to make sure that everybody knows that this project is in place, when it's starting, who's involved, why it's important, when they can expect to see milestones. I also urge you to, in your customer release notes, treat this like a product feature. So here you'll work closely with your product manager and with marketing to make sure that this is treated like the product feature that it is. And so you will start communicating in advance to say, exciting news, we are planning to replace this documentation site, and give them the whys and the wherefores and just general milestones so that they can start to anticipate it and they can start to be ready for the upcoming changes. Customer announcements. Again, beyond the release notes, let's work with marketing to share this major product feature through emails. Most of them will have some kind of a mailing app where they send customer announcements and such. And so let's make sure that the documentation is a key feature in product release announcements. And this is why you have your sponsor, because these are the people that can say, yes, of course, that is a product feature, and that should go into our customer announcements. Finally, what kind of media resources can we use? Well, if your organization has community, you're certainly going to share there. If your company has a LinkedIn channel, it should use that. If members of your team have LinkedIn channels, they should share as well. If there are industry magazines, if there are media sites, try to marketing to place this information either as an article on its own, as an announcement on its own, or as part of a broader company site. And take the opportunity to work with your vendors. Vendors often will want to communicate the success of their projects. And so volunteer to share that information, share your project progress and your success and any pitfalls, and serve as a future reference to make sure that you are getting as much visibility as you can. Okay, I can start to feel people feeling nervous, like, oh, but if we tell everybody and it goes badly, well, it's not going to go badly because we're going to have done all of our planning. And so when we've planned, when we've executed, our final communication is going to be to claim our victory, to launch and celebrate. What? Well, we delivered a major project on time and beyond expectations. We completed a migration with minimal downtime. There were no significant broken links or access issues. So talk about the what you accomplished. Talk about the how we delivered it. We did it by providing these benefits from structured writing, these values from having a CCMS, by improving this cross-functional collaboration. So give more of the meaning behind the what. So answer the why to the what does that mean? And then finally, the big why is why it matters. And talk about this for each audience, that's your stakeholders, your contributors, and your users, about why these changes made their lives easier. You're going to be able to talk about improved content discoverability, which will go up in our search success rates, increased user satisfaction with improved navigation and usability, reduced support requests related to being able to find documentation. For contributors, we've made it easier to maintain our content. We've made it easier for you to review content by having it integrated in our CCMS. We have made our publishing more predictable. It's now a flip of a switch. We've enabled scalability for future product growth. It is now much easier for us to add new content to this site than it was previously. There is a clear structure that makes it much easier to identify where new content into the architecture. And then in terms of users, improved site navigation and topic structure means it's much easier for you to get your hands on clear, accurate, and comprehensive content in a snap. Okay, so we've done it. Now we're going to assess how well it went. And so part of our assessment is moving from launch and then making sure that the team is equipped to carry on and that we have the metrics and analytics to show the improvements that were made and enable us to make data-driven decisions to continue to provide continuous improvement, and that we have indeed improved efficiency and scalability. All right, so you've launched. There are always small points that need to be addressed. You will doubtless on your go or no go for the launch have decided this part's not ready, we're going to hold that. That's not worth impacting the launch. You will rarely, if ever, want to move your scheduled launch date. So you're going to decide what is not going to be part of the launch and then immediately schedule that. You want to take the time to document the lessons you learned from this migration. Where did you not do enough planning? Where did you have unexpected problems in execution? What went well? What didn't go well? What would you do differently? So take the time to gather that information, not just from your team, but from the larger group, everybody that was involved in providing input to this. We want to make sure that we get their feedback about how it went and what would have worked better for them. We also now want to ensure, having had a small team working on the migration, we now need to make sure that the entire team is trained on the full documentation development cycle in our new CCMS, that they are equipped to write with the structured documentation framework, and that they know how to create content, migrate content in from another source. They know how to send it for review. They know how to finalize reviews. They know how to publish it. And everybody should have at least a rudimentary understanding of all of that. If you have a large enough team that you have a dedicated group of individuals that actually do your publishing, perfect. But it always helps for other people to understand the process so that they contribute to it successfully. So you're going to train your team, and obviously, because we are who we are, it is our delight, our pleasure to document our new publishing process so that everybody has a place to look, to understand in what do they need to do. If you are the person that has been asked to make an emergency release and the person that has all that information in their head is on vacation, you're stuck. So let's not leave each other in that circumstance. So document what we are doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Feel free to link to your vendor's documentation, but put down anything that is specific to the way that you are doing it. Also be clear about where the tools are, what your access permissions are, who your vendor CSM is, anything that your team, what their support URL is. Your team needs to know to use this new tool successfully. And then as you gain experience, you are going to be looking for ways to cut your time in the number of review cycle iterations, cut your time in your publishing time, anything that you can do to optimize your process through learning more about the tools and taking advantage of the features that you have beyond what you had in your previous system. And then finally, get your gold stars. You have to track that process and performance improvement so that you can show beyond anecdotally that this really did make the difference that we had intended to. As part of your ongoing maintenance, again, depending on your team size, you may assign the entire team for publishing or a small subset. But know who your go-to folks are for working with this tool. I typically assign people to be administrators of particular tools, and they become the go-to person internally for questions before we go to the vendor. Because content structuring, structured content may be new for your team, then you want to make sure that you schedule time for legacy content to be improved so that, in our first instance, our concern was getting the content into the system. Now we want to make sure that we are tagging our content properly, that it validates well, that it makes sense structurally, that we are taking advantage of structured content features like reuse, and deciding a strategy for how and when we would use different types of reuse. And then finally, a good practice is you want to have a cadence for making updates towards your phased delivery. And by that, I mean you have already scheduled any of those phases that you decided would wait until after launch, and that you look at any tech debt that you have and see how you might be able to eliminate that by incorporating it into some of your newer topics, by looking at it in your new information architecture, by using the features and functionality in your new system, so that you can take advantage of having a more robust system to down your schedule, but to make sure that you don't have a lot of legacy content sitting in its primary school uniform when everybody else has graduated to college. So let's get the right tassel and cap on and make sure that we are taking advantage of our new system. And so that means to set up metrics and analytics, we are going back to the future. We are going to go back to all of the initial input that we used to determine the need for adopting this DITA CCMS migration, and then we are going to demonstrate the improvements and then set ourselves up to track those continuing improvements. So how would you do that? Well, your CCMS probably has some reporting tools. There are certainly browser analytics tools that can talk to you about site traffic and performance metrics. By all means, if you had a survey internally or externally before you started the project, after a period of time when people have had a chance to use the system, then you want to go back and send a follow-up survey to say, how's it going now? And of course, our ever reliable buddy, our support tickets that show us where we can do better to improve our users' experience with the documentation. All right. Well, I have gabbled on for a good period of time, but I do want to leave time to take questions from you, to circle back and go into any more detail and anything that is of particular interest to you. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and go back to Scott in the studio.
I was muted. I was muted for just a second with some dogs barking. Okay, so we've got some questions for you. So the first question, let me turn this down a little bit. I don't know why I'm reverbing through your speakers. That's probably not good. Okay. I'm gonna I can't put myself on mute to ask a question, but if you can mute that for a second. What advice do you have for technical writers to convince leadership to invest in a CCMS?
You're already behind, and your over AI will be fruitless if our documentation is not equipped for the AI to find the information. You can't just plumb it into your existing documentation. AI uses structure and syntax, and we have to have our content in a way that enables the AI to take that.
One of the other questions is, what, if anything, would you have done differently on the projects that you worked on?
Started earlier.
Yeah, there should have been like 20 things for you to say.
Every time it's could we have started earlier? I think what I have done with each project is to really have a detailed plan, right? To make sure that we've looked at all the considerations. And when I talked about look at your risks, that is risks like one of my team members got sick and was gone for 4 weeks. Well, that was the person assigned to this project. So now I don't have the resource I should have had.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think I've also had this experience where late to the party people disrupt your timeline. And what I mean by that is we were doing this whole project for like 18 months, and then all of a sudden the person in charge of security said, "What about security?" I flipped out in the meeting. I'm like, "Let's give you 18 months to bring up what about security? Are you kidding me? This is your full-time freaking job." And what they were trying to do was say, "I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. We have all these security concerns," because that's all they do. It's their job. It's their job to be good at that. But we didn't involve them in a way that could help them see their value. And so at the end, they just tossed it in and that derailed everything because we had to go backwards and deal with everything again.
Right. And they're the people you needed to talk to about user authentication and SSO setup. And so the earlier, the better. And I know it's sometimes hard to talk to folks in some of the other departments, but they really have a vested interest in what we're doing. And we need to give them more information so that they understand why we're doing it, how it impacts them. And so, for instance, in one project where we've already moved from the structured authoring environment to a new CCMS, but we have a headless deployment. So the project manager is saying, "Oh, but I need an inventory of all of your topics." And the answer was, "You don't." We know where all of our topics are because we have a CCMS. What we're concerned about in this project is plumbing those into the new portal. So we know what we're doing. We have to help other people understand what we're doing because they will be working from assumptions that may not be correct.
Yeah, that's all.
Give them a chance. They're going to put their oar in sooner or later. So let them get their oar in the water earlier, and then you have a chance to.
What's the best practice for migrating or rewriting source unstructured content to target DITA structured content if the source content for a topic does not map neatly to one of the key DITA information types?
Such a good question. Sorry to say, the answer is there will be pain. The answer is, where do you want to take the pain, up front or later on? So it really depends on what environment you're coming from and whether you have content that observes some kind of structure. If you are in Word and you have used styles so that you have heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and you have applied attributes that says, I'm a user interface item, I am a cross-reference to a document, instead of swiping something and making it bold, or swiping it and making it italics, or, that all of your document is just normal. You've just used text decorations instead of structure. Yeah, that's really not going to migrate well.
Yeah,
But if you can get it,
I might
it's
also
also
add that DITA is topic based, and so it is they've got a single topic. And technical writers in the past, I don't know about today, I surveyed everybody, but in the past we used to intermingle other ideas, and so we would say, if you're doing this, then that. But if you're not doing this, then that. Those are two different things. They need to be two different topics. They cannot be in the same topic. If you do this, then you tell the answer. Don't say, if you also do this, then that. Then you've got so you have to break them apart. You have to rewrite them into individual topics.
You do. So the question is, are you going to rewrite them in Word, or are you going to drag that in there and then tag it all? So it really depends on the state.
Help you rewrite the paragraph so that it's answering a single question and identify what is not that part of that answer and push it out to a separate topic and rewrite that one. Okay.
Absolutely.
One final question. We've already moved to DITA, but we're simply storing files in a Git repository. Oh, there you go. This is not considered a CCMS. No, it's definitely not. I asked Copilot why a CCMS, and I don't think we met the criteria of where it helps. Our reuse is low. So we'll talk about that for a second. We only output to one format. We publish along with our software products, so our versioning is handled by the software product teams. So why would I go through the effort for my very small team?
Yeah. So that's, been in this situation a few times. Yeah. So the answer is not obvious to the developers. They've created a proprietary tool for you, and it works just beautifully for them. You are spending a whole lot more time on unnecessary activities, fooling around with your GitHub repository. And it's not as flexible as a CCMS. Can you send your content for review from GitHub so that all of your reviewers can review your content in one place? And then you can incorporate those comments into the live source. That's one advantage of a CCMS. Will you be translating your content? Will you have to take everything out of Git so that you can send it to a localization company who will then send it back in a spreadsheet for you to put back into Git? Or would you like the ease and convenience?
I think what you're hitting on is they asked the question about the current state. But no company exists to be static in the current state. They exist to grow and to be profitable. And some organizations may have a different mission and they're not growth oriented, but most are growth oriented, which means they want to go to new markets. New markets will introduce new laws, new customs, new languages, new approaches, all kinds of new stuff. And so now you're stuck and you're going to have to do it the hard way. And it's going to be really, really bad. Well, the question was, why should they go through the effort? And the answer might be not. And you may get left behind, or it may be perfectly fine. Maybe your company will be static and doesn't grow, and that's perfectly fine for your customers. It'll be great. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump off and end the show and say thank you to our audience and ask them to give us a review of the information that was provided by Mel today. You can use our 1 through 5-star rating system, in which 1 is a low rating and 5 is a 5. Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate you watching Building a Business Case for Adopting a CCMS for Technical Documentation with Melanie Denise Davis as our guest. As always, be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. And we'll see you on another episode of the Content Wrangler webinar series in the near future. Thanks a lot for joining us, Melanie.
Thanks so much.